going down. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
Now then, you're welcome back. It's Joe Malloy with you here in studio. Dan McDonald of the Irish Independent alongside me as well. And it's Leicester City 2, Chelsea 0 after 64 minutes. And we're joined by Suzy Wrack, who has been assessing Phil Neville's England tenure. Would have been 3 years in about 5 days' time, but Phil is off to manage Inter Miami, and Suzanne's been looking back as 3 years in charge in The Guardian. Suzanne, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks for joining us. Settle something for us before we get into Phil Neville. Wayne Rooney's retired as a player. His level of greatness, in your opinion, what jumps to mind when we say Rooney?
Well, I'm an Arsenal fan, so the first thing that springs to my mind is his goal, his maiden goal for Everton against Arsenal. But yeah, phenomenally talented player, incredible records, and just brilliant but gusting legacy in the game.
Okay, good. Well, a bit of positivity, because I think we have spent too much of the previous 20 minutes talking about unfulfilled potential, maybe.
Oh, you think? Unfulfilled potential when it comes to Wayne Rooney? Oh, I mean, he's won everything there is to win. And, I mean, hasn't had the worst England career that any player could ever have. I think he's been phenomenally good from pretty much start to finish of his career. So I'm a bit surprised to hear that.
We're negative types. Don't mind us. Let's get into Phil Neville. What kind of reaction did you get to the piece?
Oh, quite mixed, actually. I mean, overwhelmingly agreement and positivity from inside women's football circles and from fans of the women's game. A little bit of consternation more generally, I think, from football fans. Thought maybe I was a little bit harsh, and maybe I was. Maybe it's having been stuck indoors for since Thursday without having left, while Phil Neville's on a beach in Miami on his next job, having not done the best job in the world. That's coloured me a little bit, but no, it's been an interesting response to the piece.
Okay.
But having watched Phil for 3 years and being one of the ones to spend the longest time giving him the benefit of the doubt, I think it was important to take up some of the issues that people have kind of almost coloured over with his tenure to put a positive spin on it.
Okay. So you spent these 3 years covering the team then, clearly, and you've got a feel for Neville and how he operated. Like, you do certainly give him some credit on certain aspects. Like, initially in the piece, you talk about his approach with the players and his player management being world-class, about his big game experience being important as well. And he had a rapport with the players, and he could charm his employers as well. You use a fairly damning phrase. Please don't ever say this about me. He is overall not an unlikable person. So I mean, I don't think he'll quite have that as on his tombstone down the line. You said, however, we will mainly remember the outbursts, the narrative twisting, and an arrogance not befitting a man with such limited coaching credentials. So the narrative twisting, the arrogance. Talk to us. What are you referencing here? What's going on here?
So, for a long time after England lost the World Cup semi-final against the US in the summer of 2019, Neville kept up this narrative of the team are just a little hiccup, team in transition, a little bit of a slump, and to a certain degree you could excuse some of the defeats after that tournament, as they went on a very long run, 5 games without a win, losing 4 of them. But as they built up, and as they kept putting in really, really poor performances, it got harder and harder to excuse it. And this is just a phase. Plenty of the other big teams who had bad World Cups were putting themselves together, but England still couldn't get over this slump. Big decisions on kind of personnel and formation and the position he played players in just seemed kind of wildly off kilter. But Neville was sort of repeatedly basically trying to make you think that you weren't seeing what you were seeing. So we sat in up in Middlesbrough to watch Brazil play England. Brazil won 2-1. And Phil comes in afterwards and said they played really well. It was a great performance, but we've watched the game. It's just this attempt to sort of overturn, rather than kind of explain what had happened and kind of discuss the nuances of that game. It was you haven't seen what you've seen, and that was extremely frustrating. One journalist for another newspaper called said that the performance of that game was tepid. I didn't think it was that good, but Neville really went off on one the next game when England beat Portugal 1-0, and laid into that journalist, said, "You wanted me sacked. You wanted me sacked, and this performance was brilliant." Praised the resolve and the attitude of his players, and it was almost like that one win in Portugal had sort of given him a get out of jail free card. I've done it. We've turned it around. That 5-game losing streak is over. Except the performance in Portugal was appalling. I mean, it was absolutely terrible. They played awfully. The goal was a scrappy, fluky kind of knocked-in goal from Beth Mead. They were extremely lucky. Portugal were a team ranked at least 30 places below them, possibly more. And it was just extremely frustrating to have to constantly deal with a manager who was basically contradicting what you could see with your own eyes and trying to tell you that what you were watching was brilliant when it really wasn't. And so there was this kind of like unwillingness to engage with a discussion on tactics, on what's going wrong, on any kind of acceptance of there being a problem that was really, really frustrating to deal with. And the thing about why I say, kind of he's not unlikable, is because he's not. He's actually, one-to-one in press conferences before games. He's not a bad man. Like he's actually quite a likable guy. But he is. He's made a whole series of mistakes throughout his England tenure, where he's kind of got snappy at the wrong points and treated the press like the enemy, and taken advantage of the sort of leeway that we've given him in the first however many months of his stay in charge to then sort of throw it back at us and treat us like we're stupid almost. It's very, very frustrating. I don't think he was conscious. I think it was him trying to be a Fergie and hunker down and protect his players and all that kind of stuff. But it just made him look mad because the performances were bad. And managers that sit there and watch a bad performance and then try and go in and say, that was brilliant, this was world class, everything is going to plan, look mad. And it makes it really hard to write about as well, because, you're writing a match report and you've written about a game and what's gone on in it and what's gone wrong and the bad points of it and where it can be turned around, and the manager says it's brilliant. And how do you put that quote into that match report? You can't. And it makes it really difficult as a journalist to be honest about what's going on, because you literally, it's like, I'm being extra harsh here, but it's Donald Trumpian, isn't it? Like, if you're saying something is absolutely brilliant, but we all know it's not true, like how can we possibly put that into match report? And it made it very hard from that point of view as well. But again, I don't think any of it was conscious. I don't think he's a particularly bad guy. I think he's been extremely lucky in his career, and to have the career that he has had post playing. But I don't think he's fundamentally a bad guy. I just think he doesn't really think before he speaks. He is a very, very privileged guy and a bit removed from the reality of what everyone else's circumstances in women's football in particular are. And it's sort of given him a little bit of a plinth that he feels that he's built rather than being given.
Just for listeners, Neville took the reins in January 18. England were third in the world then, and the top-ranked European nation. They now sit sixth, and to be fair, they've been on a bad run. So 7 defeats and a draw in their past 11 games. The jewel in his crown is reaching the World Cup semi-final, but that was the team's third consecutive major semi-final. So it's not like a massive improvement, you would have to say, on previous efforts, but still, it's a World Cup semi-final. Dan, I know you had a read of the piece.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask Suzanne. I mean, when Phil Neville was appointed, there was obviously that historic trawl of comments he'd made previously, and like, I'm sort of wondering, was there a point where he was ever truly comfortable in the job, or from the start was there a view that he, I don't know, a sort of certain suspicion of him arising from that storm at the start, if you know what I mean, and his view even of the women's game, or would that set him off on the wrong foot with people?
Initially, yes. You know, the tweets that came out that looked very, very dubious. There was about a week between those tweets going public and being all over the press and the FA holding press conference, the first ever press conference with Neville in charge, where he was able to address them. And when he addressed them in that press conference, he was brilliant. And at that press conference, it was the first time, I think, where you've had all of the big journalists from men's football sitting around a table, as well as sort of the more traditional women's football journalists and the independent journalists that cover women's football in the room as well, all sitting around. And he charmed absolutely everyone in that room. He was excellent. He answered every question. He made no excuses for those tweets. He, you know, completely, you know, kind of drew a line under them and said they weren't good enough. They were out of order. He should never have written them. But he also explained them, and he explained them in a way that didn't dismiss them or forgive them. And from that point, I think he did get a bit of a clean slate. And I think he did get a clean slate for quite a while. And I certainly was very much give him time, you know, that he deserved a decent run and a decent run of games, because whilst we could have all the disagreements in the world about how he was appointed, and whether he should have had that job in the first place with so little managerial experience, they're all questions to ask of the FA. Phil Neville was approached about a job, he got it, and he deserves a shot at going for it. Like, it's not his fault that the FA messed up in potentially appointing him.
And Suzanne, on that, sorry to interrupt, was there much resentment initially, or even a lingering resentment, that Phil Neville, treble winner, big deal, you know, big name, got the job ahead of other people who've been working within the women's game and have more of a track record? Did that follow him around a bit within the game, or at a certain point were people okay with that appointment?
I don't think anyone was ever okay with the appointment. I think many people didn't have a problem with him personally, or his record, or what he's done in men's football, or the attention that he brought to women's football as a result of that. All of that is relatively positive stuff.
Yeah.
To the extent of the effect of that, I think gets overplayed a little bit. But I think the key part was that he had no managerial experience, bar a couple of games in charge of Salford City on a temporary basis, the team that he part owns. Other than that, he had assistant coaching roles and things that hadn't gone very well at Valencia and Man United, a okay run at Everton, the team that he was playing at, and had a relationship and a rapport and an understanding of the players with on the pitch. And so I don't think there would ever have been a situation where someone with so little experience getting the England men's job. And I think that is the biggest problem, is that you've got someone who has zero top level managerial experience in the men or women's game coming into the biggest job in women's football, and that's just seen as okay. But that was never aimed at him. It was always aimed at the FA and the decision to employ him in the first place, rather than him. And I think particularly right up to the World Cup, he was given a very, very fair hearing. Generally speaking, there were people that had doubts quite early on about tactical decisions he was making, but overall he was given the benefit of the doubt and a bit of time to find his feet. But it was sort of from the World Cup on, maybe slightly before the World Cup onwards, that the criticism started to ratchet up a bit, because there were two big defeats in the build up to the World Cup that suddenly halted the momentum a little bit. A loss in a friendly to Sweden, a loss to Canada, a loss to New Zealand, and suddenly the momentum running into that World Cup looked a little bit off. They then had a fairly, like I say, you reached the semi-final of a World Cup, but the performances in that run weren't amazing. There was one complete performance against Norway, and I would argue that's the only complete performance of Neville's entire 3-year tenure, because in every single other game there were sloppy periods, lapses in concentration, defensive fragilities, and chaos at the back that just looked somewhat comical at times. And all of those issues were present in most games. And there was a bit of luck that got him to a semi-final, and just the fact that he had very, very good players, sometimes playing out of position, sometimes relying on Ellen White, who got 6 goals to sort of dig them out of a hole and get them through things. And the World Cup semi-final, England went close. Steph Houghton missed a late penalty, but I don't think anyone could have watched that game and thought England would have gone on to win that in extra time, because I don't think the US ever looked out of control of that game.
Okay.
And the US were taken close by Spain. They were taken close by France. The Netherlands in the final were the only team to score, to not concede within the first 12 minutes against them in the entire tournament. So England were not the second best team in that competition, which is sometimes, I think, like the narrative that likes to get played, that the semi-final was the final and whoever went on to win that was going to win the tournament. I don't think that's the case. And I think England were very lucky with who they met along the way and the incredible form of Ellen White.
Okay. Suzy Wrack, you can read Suzanne's piece in The Guardian. Thanks so much for your time, Suzanne. Appreciate it.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Football on Off the Ball
with Pat